What's up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls around the world? I would like to welcome you back to the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. On today's episode, we have got a very special guest. She is an outstanding thinker. She is a super intelligent woman. She is a YouTube commentator. She's also a cryptocurrency enthusiast. And she is Desi-Rae Thinking. How you doing, Desi-Rae?
I'm doing well. That was a very apt description of me. And thank you for having me today.
You're very welcome. So I've given the people a little quick overview. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell people a little bit more about you?
Okay. Well, Zuby sort of summed it up, but my name is Desi-Rae. I run a YouTube channel called Just Thinking Out Loud. Even though it's a bit slow lately, I began that in March 2017, and it was just an outlet for me to share my thoughts with the world. Particularly, I focus a lot on identity politics and also on speech and promoting free speech. And then I work with the cryptocurrency project, and I'm also a lot into crypto. And one other thing that I do is that I'm a painter, an oil painter. I do a lot of realistic sort of portraits or surrealist type paintings, even though I haven't done a bit of that in a while. I'm currently back in school, so all my creative work has sort of slowed down. But those are the things that I do. Yeah.
Awesome. So free speech advocate, student, cryptocurrency enthusiast, artist, creative. It's a female version of me. This is wonderful. I'm
Yeah.
playing. So tell us, people will be able to hear a little bit of an accent from where is that accent from?
Oh yes, that is a big part of my identity, which I didn't, say that when I introduced myself. I am from the Caribbean island of Jamaica. I lived there for 17 years, and then I came to the US for college in 2010. So that's where I'm from.
Okay, so let's take it way back. So tell us a little bit more about growing up in Jamaica. What was that like?
Um, Growing up in Jamaica was different from here. I think one of the biggest things that would stand out is the social environment. I think that people are more genuine, or the way they discuss things. I don't want to say more genuine because then it sounds like I'm making a value judgment. But in social interactions were different. So I found it easier to talk to people and discuss things. For example, I would say that there probably wasn't anything or isn't anything like the same kind of political correctness that I perceive here, for one. And then another striking difference for me that I didn't really realize until afterwards, was how people form their identity, because it's a lot less like race focused as it is here in the US. Another obvious thing is the weather is different. The difference in time that the sun sets over the years, only like an hour difference versus
Yeah.
here, it's like maybe a 3 hour difference. I'm in the Northeast, by the way. And another thing is that growing up, I was in a Christian household, and all the schools that I went to, I would say like 95% of schools in Jamaica are Christian. So that's also something definitely very strong Judeo-Christian values transmitted there. At the same time, there's a lot of African culture influence. So there's like a very interesting mix.
Mm.
But I would definitely say in institutions, it's very Judeo-Christian. So that was another thing. Those are the biggest thing. The culture was a bit different, but that's hard to describe. Like people are more direct. It's kind of just hard to describe. You'd have to visit and live there maybe. And then the weather or the climate. And then I'd also say,
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, I've watched quite a lot of your YouTube videos and seen some of the things you talk about, and also, of course, I follow you on Twitter and we interact there. And you're certainly a very thoughtful and outspoken individual. Have you always been like that? Is that something that you've had in you since you were a kid, or is it something that came along one day when you were a bit older and you suddenly felt like, you know what, I'm going to make I'm going to make a YouTube channel and I'm going to start putting my thoughts and my opinions out there, because everybody has thoughts and opinions, but not everyone feels motivated to go out there in public and talk about, especially some of the more sensitive topics that you speak about. You know, a lot of people feel worried about it, as you said before, for political correctness or fear of what other people may think or whatever it is. So for you, where does that come from?
I've definitely always been outspoken, but I'd never been outspoken on a public platform. My mom always used to tell me that I should join the debate team, which I never did. So I've always been like that kind of thinker. And also when I started my channel, I didn't tell my parents, but I think one of their friends found me, I don't know how, and then told them. And they were like not surprised at all. They were like, this sounds like something that you would do. So I've always been like that. I will say that what prompted me to start Just Thinking Out Loud was definitely a desire to speak out, because I felt like there was a social atmosphere trying to silence me in subtle ways. I had a few conversations with people who I had been around ever since I'd been in the US, which had been like 6 years at that time when I first started thinking about those things, who I thought were friends that I could talk to. But then once I started saying something like, oh, I don't think Trump is that bad, that's probably like the first thing that made me realize that I was thinking differently from others. I didn't even say I liked him. I was like, I don't think he's as bad as people think.
You didn't
And
venomously hate him. That's enough of a crime. If you don't venomously hate him, that's already a crime.
Exactly. And just doing that resulted in arguments with people. So, and then there was also a lot of people that I would speak to, I felt as if they expected me to have a certain opinion. Actually, I think that's kind of changing now, but it might be because of I'm running, like the school I'm going to is like heavily like engineer type thinkers. So I think that they're less likely to assume that I think a certain way.
Well, they're more likely to be conservative, to be fair.
Yeah. So I'm experiencing that less now, but at that time, I was realizing that a lot of people assumed to know what I was thinking because of how I look. I figured that out, and I wasn't used to that. That's something I wasn't used to in Jamaica also. So I've always been outspoken, but the reason why I started the channel was because I felt like I needed to say something. And even now I've been in this sort of downtime and I've been thinking about these things a lot. And every time I hear something, like recently I don't know if you know the incident at Barnard College, I think it was. Every time I hear something like that, I'm like, this can't get any more ridiculous. But I actually feel some sort of responsibility to say something.
I'm not actually familiar with this situation. Can you explain it?
Oh, sure. Okay, I don't have all the details, but there was a Black student, I think it was a Columbia student, who went to Barnard College. From what I understand, I think it's a girls' school, but I'm not sure. But he went to this library late, and they have a policy of the officers asking whoever's entering to show their ID before they enter. But the student thought that it was a policy that wasn't enforced equally, meaning that a lot of white students would get to go in without showing their ID. So that person went there specifically with the goal of showing this inequality. So he didn't want to show his ID at first, and then eventually showed his ID and then was apprehended. And a lot of there are protests happening around it now because they were like, it was because he was a Black student going into a library. Oh, the unthinkable.
So wait, he was apprehended after showing the ID, or he refused to show it and then?
Yeah, he refused to show it at first because he was trying to make a point.
Yeah.
When I say apprehended, I mean, like they stopped him from going in because he wasn't showing ID. But then when he showed it, they still didn't let him go in. I don't know why. And some people are like,
that sounds bizarre.
Well, it's more complicated than that.
Okay.
I'm not the best person to talk.
Oh no, that's okay. No, I was gonna say if they let him in afterwards and then they still made a big deal about it, I'd be like, okay, that's weird.
Well, I think there was already a commotion by the time that he showed them the ID, because there was already an incident beforehand, and he was just going there to prove the point that other people don't have to show their ID, and so they say that he was being racially profiled. But if he wasn't complying at first, then he wasn't complying. So But anytime I hear incidents like this, and then I see the response, like there was this 40,000 like Twitter thread that I saw, and everybody was like, well, this is what they do, this is America, that kind of stuff. Like when I saw that, what I'm trying to say is that every time I see this, that kind of response of people just buying this narrative that, you know, they're being systematically oppressed, basically, because that was because of incidents that are blown up, even though the incident was, that's what the student was trying to do. It makes me think that I should say something. Because even if in my mind I see things and I'm like, well, this is not true, if I don't say something and then there are just people who are still peddling a certain narrative, then I'm probably being complicit in my own way. But at the same time, it all gets sort of tiring because it's just the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I feel you on that completely, because part of it is some of the same reason that I ended up starting this podcast even, you know, just looking at the way the conversation was around a whole bunch of things and knowing what my own personal views and perspectives and opinions are and seeing how they align, or in many cases misalign, with lots of the popular narratives that are peddled out there. I was like, okay, I'm not going to be silently complicit. You know, as we know from history, you can be complicit just by not saying anything and not challenging anything. So I was like, okay, I can see why people get cowed into silence, or I can see why people don't speak up. But I call it, what did I call it the other day? I called it like social justice warrior terrorism, essentially. So they're forcing people to self-censor. So it's not even that this is coming from a kind of government level necessarily. It's like this environment has just been created where people are, you know, scared of a tiny minority of people, to be honest, you know, a very small, minor number of activist people who are very loud online and real life with their protests and things like that, who are trying to get people shut down, deplatformed, censored, get them fired from their jobs, get them to lose their positions at university, whatever it is. So I can understand that fear. But at the same time, I'm like, nah, screw that. I'm not going to let me not be another person who kind of keeps their head down, hoping that it'll never hit me, because the way these things work, it'll come around and hit. It comes around and hits everyone eventually. Even the people who are the activists, right? It's you can never be woke enough. Someone's always going to outwoke you. So I refer to it as a circular firing squad, because everybody's going to get shot eventually.
Yeah, it's also a continuous battle, because say I have a couple of videos that I did on why I don't like Black Lives Matter and why I think gun control isn't a good idea, more gun control isn't a good idea. And maybe 2 or 3 times a year, there's some huge incident and it's just the same arguments being repeated. So to me, in my mind, it's like, oh, well, I've already talked about this. Do I really need to talk about this? But you realize that every single time those incidents happen, that's an opportunity for the debate to shift again. So just tying into the whole, it's kind of tiring, but it's also necessary, because there's still the people who don't agree with, who I don't agree with, who are pushing their version of reality, I guess, out there.
Absolutely. Well, I think you always, I mean, it doesn't matter what side or position things are coming from. I think you always want, in order to have a conversation, it needs to be decently balanced. If you're going to have a debate, if someone's going to come and push a certain position, then you need people to be able to counter it or challenge it or state their opinions. I don't like this whole idea that there's only one way of thinking and this is it, and anybody who challenges this is evil or is a bigot or is some kind of horrible thing. And that's literally the game that's been being played for the past several years. It's just like, okay, well, if you're not in favor of what I think about gun control, then it's because you're evil and you want children to be shot, right? That's what people try to do. Okay, if you don't take my position on abortion and pro-choice, it's because you hate women and you want to control them and you want to enslave them and you're a horrible person, right? It can't just possibly be because you value an innocent human life, right? So people always try to frame these things in a very particular way, and it's once you see the tactic, it becomes like extremely obvious. You know what I mean? Like to me, it's just like I can almost preempt it, right? I can see it coming before someone even says it. I'm like, okay, I'll say this, and then they're going to say this, and it's like I've been through this cycle. I've been through this cycle many times now, online and offline, and it's very predictable. It's very boring. but also
Yeah, it's boring.
yeah, it is. But I think it shows that people, the truth is though, is it's important because I think even when you get these people who are, claim that they just want to shut someone down or that they don't want to listen. I think ultimately, if you are confident in your position and your belief and your perspective on something, you shouldn't be afraid of it being challenged. So the fact that these people, that the fact that the only debate tactic is to either silence the other person so you don't hear the other side of the argument, or to insinuate that they're some kind of terrible person, to me that means that, well, maybe you don't even really, maybe your conviction about your own beliefs are not that good. Maybe your arguments aren't that good. Why would you be afraid of me even being able to talk or being able to challenge your thing? If your argument is so great, if your position is the one that makes sense, you should be able to rebut everything I'm saying and just be like, oh no, this is, and that's happened before, right? I've changed my position on certain subjects because my argument just did not hold, right? My argument did not hold, and I had to be like, well, I concede that because, yeah, you're right. Like, so, and that's how minds are changed. So I think sometimes you're right. It can be boring. It can be frustrating. But I think it's at the same time, it's very important that continues. Otherwise, you're gonna just let the crazies run away with the whole thing, and just let the crazy people set the rules, set the game, and that's it. And I think if it goes too far, then it'll become extremely difficult, or perhaps even illegal. Like, it sounds crazy, but even
Yeah.
illegal to challenge certain ideas. And you're starting to see that happen in Canada. You're starting to see it happen in the UK. US isn't quite as far gone, but I mean, in the UK, you're getting the police knocking on people's doors for stuff that they're writing on Twitter. And I'm not talking about violent threats or anything like that, just opinions. And I'm like, wow, people are getting police phone calls from something that, like, that's insane to me. Like, it's
Yeah.
crazy. Yeah. So, oh gosh, I'm trying to think of I don't even know where we go from here. So let's take it back a little bit. So let's talk about you going from Jamaica to the US. Is it New York where you
Hmm.
first went? Is that right? Cool.
Yeah, New
So,
York, upstate New York. It's just a big difference in the
okay.
city.
So tell us a little bit more about that transition and some of those changes that you touched on. You touched on briefly earlier, in
Mhm.
terms to political correctness and identity and stuff like that. Can you go into that in a little more detail, what your observations were?
Yeah. I was very naive. Naive isn't the right word. I was very oblivious to a lot of racial issues in the US when I first came to New York. I think in Jamaica, there's definitely a sense of like Black pride or Black empowerment, but it doesn't have the same almost bitterness, if that's the right word, as what I experience here. And it seems more of a historical thing than here. But at first, I didn't really care about that. I kind of struggled financially in college. So I was mostly focused on my work, getting my work done, getting through school. So I didn't care about that stuff. I was dating someone who was white at the time, and I was still oblivious to all of that. His parents were very nice. They would be considered progressive, but
Hmm.
I didn't even know that. Like, I didn't know those terms. I didn't. I went to a very progressive school. Um, I think something that displays the height of it is that there is this day. I forget what it was called. There was this day where a lot of girls would go around like wearing like tassels on their chest instead of like a shirt. And it was like about like, oh, it was like not slut shaming. Sorry, I think that's what it was called. It was like a day that
Oh,
was like against slut shaming. And there was one moment where there was a woman on the stage. She like took her tampon out and like threw it into the crowd. I know. I always
oh
bring it up
man.
because that was like the height of
Oh
just
no.
like exemplifying what my college was like.
And people ask me
So
why I think modern feminism is insane.
I
What
mean,
on
but
earth?
but at the time, I just thought it was interesting. I was like, oh, these people are just like they feel oppressed and they're just trying to like throw off the patriarchy or whatever. I wasn't really in touch with like the more serious social consequences of
Yeah.
what these people were trying to express, if that makes sense. Because I just didn't really care about it. And then what happened was that I graduated college and then I moved to the city. I was living with relatives and I really don't like and NYC, by the way. But that was more of a culture shock to me, moving from upstate New York to New York City, than it was moving from where I was in Jamaica to. I know it sounds really crazy, but it was,
Yeah, no,
because when I
how so?
moved, but when I moved from Jamaica, it was more like a novel experience. The weather was different. Like it was really cold. I had to figure out that I need to wear a hat on my head, or and I was always like colder than everyone else. That's probably the biggest thing, was the difference in temperature, and seeing like squirrels, or seeing a train for the first time, or seeing deer. Like those are things I'd never seen before. Like those things stood out to me more so than interactions with people, because I thought that, like, talking to people, they were like a bit different from me. I thought they were a bit more introverted, and they were less direct. Those are things that I noticed. But other than that, I didn't really notice anything. I was also in some ways, you could say, like in a bubble, because I was friends with a lot of international students.
Okay.
But the guy I was dating was local from the area, so I did also get like a taste of, and I dated him all throughout college, so I did get a taste of like that specific environment. I don't know, everybody was just kind of nice to me. I thought that they like smoked weed more so than even a lot of people I would know in Jamaica. It was like more of a, like, they just do this to hang out, like things like that. But then anyway, so when I finished college, um I just had a few experiences where I had a job. One thing was that I had a job um as an EMT, and actually I don't want to get there yet, because that's like the bigger thing that made me really wake up.
Mhm.
Some minor differences were, like, when I took the bus, I would say hi to the bus driver, and they would like look at me weird. They don't all do that. Like, some of them would be nice to you back, but things that were more okay upstate, people would look at me funny. So that stuff was kind of a culture shock to me. And then, of course, the garbage and just the pace, and everybody on the subway looks like miserable a little bit.
It's like London. It's like London. I don't know if you've been to London as well.
No, I've never been there.
Okay, yeah, London and New York are very similar in that regard.
Oh, okay. Yeah, but one particular incident was, I had a job. I was trying to find work, and I had a job as an EMT. And a lot of the people where I was working with, they were Black, which I quickly found out was kind of important, because they expected me to be like them. And they kind of scorned me for not being like them. I told them that I had been living upstate, and then they said that I was up with the slave masters. This was just one or two guys. There was one guy, but then another guy was supporting him, and then another guy like would not say anything. So it was like okay, like in their culture to say stuff like that. I actually became friends with one guy who wasn't like them, but most of them were like that.
Okay.
And
What was it that prompted those comments? Was it just saying that you were upstate, or was it?
yeah, I
Oh,
was like introducing myself, and
oh,
they were
right.
asking me where I was from, and I spoke to someone else, and she
Sorry,
was
that's
saying,
not even like historically accurate though, because there wasn't even slavery in New York, was there?
I think there was, but I think up in the north, from what I know, in the north, it wasn't as bad as in the south. And in the north,
Okay.
that's where they were like fighting for freedom.
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of people
When
were
I think of
enslaved to it.
U.S. slavery, I mean, vast majority of it was in the South.
Yeah, but I don't know if there were there was no slavery at all. But I do know that that was like the bastion of freedom. I do know that,
Yeah,
like, the more people in the north were like freed and educated.
yeah, definitely.
Um, so that was one thing that happened, and then they also were like, I don't know, like mocking me for speaking proper English. Like they said that I was being really proper, that they use the word proper, which I am, especially when I don't know people.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
So that was definitely like the turning point, because I was really offended. I didn't get into the argument. I just kind of ignored the whole thing. But I was like, that was when I was like, screw this, to not use a bad word on video. And yeah, that's probably the biggest thing. And then also, as I said, I had a couple discussions with friends, and I had a friend who was like pro Antifa and hated Trump and that kind of stuff, and just realizing that I didn't think like people, and that a lot of the thinking that people had was for protection of minorities. And I remember thinking that I never ever felt like people were really like being dicks to me. Like I personally never felt that. And I'm not saying that nobody else can have that experience. That's possibly true, but they were making it sound so widespread, and it was just like not my experience at all.
Yeah.
So I was just like, what are these people talking about? And that's when I just felt as if it was the whole using people as pawns almost, or politicians appealing to specific voting blocks based on their identity and using fair. I definitely think I saw that and I didn't like it.
No,
And I wish I could educate people more, but it's difficult.
It's very difficult. It's extremely difficult because, I mean, I really, really dislike I'm not in the US, but I really, really dislike the Democratic Party. Like I really, really dislike its modern incarnation. Because that's literally how I see it. I just see it's all based on identity politics. It's literally just, looking at people as little voting blocks and groups. It's like, okay, how can we use this minority group to our advantage, and this one and this one and that one, and I'm sure there is some, this isn't talking about like all the voters and stuff. I'm sure there's lots of people who genuinely want to help people who they may think are underprivileged in some way. But I think at the sort of higher power levels, I just see it as like a game. And what makes it very obvious to me is the way they treat people who are from those groups who do not fit into their line of thinking, right? It's like there's nothing worse to them than like a black conservative or a black libertarian or a gay conservative or a black gay conservative, right? Or a black, if you were like a lesbian black woman who's conservative, like that'll be like, because it goes against the entire narrative that you're trying to push here. So what typically happens is, both from, I don't know, say, the white folk and also from, other black people, is like they're like the attack dogs to make sure that people stay in line. And I find that whole thing crazy. Like, to me, I'm like, that's what I consider actually racist. If you're looking at me and you're saying, okay, I'm a black guy, someone's looking at you and saying you're a black woman, so therefore you must think like this, or you must believe these things, or you must believe you're some kind of victim, or that you're oppressed, or that and you yourself are like, no, that's not actually my personal experience. This is not to say that these things don't exist on any level, but that's not my experience. And no, I don't think the US is that bad. No, I don't think the UK is that bad. I mean, it's very similar here, even though the history is pretty different. But there's a lot of, black and ethnic minority people here who kind of feel the same way. And it's just this constant victimhood narrative, which I'm personally not a fan of. I'm really, really, really sick and tired of it. And I think it's coming back in force, which is the thing that's weird to me, because I don't know, it seems sort of in the past 5 years or so, in the past sort of 4 or 5 years, there's just been this resurgence of all these ideas. It's like it's like way back in the day, people were judging each other based on their skin color and their sexuality and their gender and all that. And it was a big problem. And then it got sort of mostly resolved. And then it was like, okay, cool. In the 90s, in the early thousands, people were kind of cool. Like, I don't remember in 2005, people making big deals about race and gender and all this kind of stuff. It was just like, okay, like everyone's kind of cool. Everyone's getting on. And now you're in 2019 when you should really be further along that road. But it's like people have fallen back into this into what I consider very divisive narratives, right? You've got these ideas of, oh, you've got white male privilege, or you've got cis privilege, or you've got this, or you've got that, and this, and you're trying to sort of rank all these people on these immutable characteristics. And I find the whole thing just very crazy. Like, it's very weird to me, and I don't know why. Sometimes I feel like I'm one of the only people who sees it, and I feel like I know I'm not, but it feels that way sometimes, and I'm like, what? Like, what's going on here? Like, how come, like, are we inhabiting the same planet? Are we in the same place? Right. I'll be talking to someone and they'll be telling me how racist the UK is, how terrible the UK is, how there's all this rampant racism, rampant sexism, whatever. And I'm like, where? Like, I've been here for 20 years. And I've been to more towns and cities in this country with my music than almost anybody has. I've spoken to more people in this country than almost anybody has. And I have not experienced this at all, like in that whole time period. And I'm kind of like, okay, I'm not saying my experience is the same as everybody else's, but if it were as bad as you're trying to tell me it is, then surely I would see this. So it confuses me sometimes. I wonder if I'm like, am I in the same country? Are we in the same reality? Because it's weird how two people can go through the same thing or even be in the same place and just interpret stuff so differently. And that's something that fascinates me, though.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I have the same experience. I've had a lot of friends who are who also came like after high school to the US to continue their studies, and a couple of them definitely see it differently from me, from the ones I've spoken to. But then a couple of them also are kind of just neutral about it. Like they don't really seem to lean one way or the other. And I wanted to say that I'm so used to hearing the term like Black conservatives don't get treated well by the left, like hearing things like that. And I just want to point out it's very true because a lot of people are like, well, Black conservatives just use it to like gain fame or stuff like that. And no, like it's really true. Like you are
I think
treated as like an outcast.
honestly, the fact that what you just said there is to me, I'm like, that is racist. Like you're saying that the only way a Black person could even be conservative or have some conservative ideas is if they're being paid by somebody, or
Right.
they're what word do they use? They're a grifter, they're a shit. Like that can't just genuinely be their position. And I'm just like, how can people not see how can you not see the hypocrisy of what you're saying here? You're telling me that I don't even believe, like I'm not even strictly a conservative, but you're just saying I can't even believe what I believe because he must. I've seen rumors on Twitter that I'm actually that my music career is funded by the Conservative Party in the UK, and that I'm supposed to like infiltrate the youth and poison the youth. That this is literally like I've seen people saying this kind of stuff, or he's funded by conservative think tanks, or he's and I'm just like, you're actually insane. Like there are people who are not white who like think differently, and I genuinely think it's extreme. That's such a racist position, right? To think that all Black people think the same way, or all Asian people think the same, or all, like it's terrible. I don't get it, and I don't see how people don't see that.
Yeah, it grosses me out as well. I think that who you are should be about your values. And sometimes I think that can line up with, say, ethnicity. But that's the other thing that really pisses me off. It's the way people, especially in my opinion, Black Americans, confuse ethnicity with race. That like drives me crazy because I feel as if my whole history is being erased when I come into contact with people who think like that. And they're like, oh, you're just trying to not be Black, or you're just trying to like disown this. But like, no, you're like literally just trying to erase all of my experience and my like origins and like the culture that I come from. And I think that because a lot of Black Americans here are so often put on a pedestal to have their voice heard, it's almost as if they can't conceive that, oh, somebody else's voice could also be important in these matters such as this. Does that make sense? It doesn't just have to come from the lens of the Black American perspective.
Yeah.
And they should have the opportunity to talk, especially because it's almost as if their perspective is trying to envelope every other ethnicity that could somehow be identified as Black, even though they probably don't even identify themselves that way. Yeah. So that's another thing that also really upsets me.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I think that in my personal experience, I think that a lot of Black Americans or people in America in general. Firstly, I don't think that there's such a thing as a Black American perspective, right? I don't like, that's too wide, right? You've got millions of Black American perspectives. But I do think that to the degree that something like that may exist, I think that people think that that is therefore just the Black perspective or the Black experience. So whether someone is from Jamaica or Nigeria or South Africa or the Middle East, right? If their skin is this color, then it's all the same thing, kind of thing. And it's like, no, these are entirely different groups with different histories. And then beyond that, you're just talking about individuals, right? You could take one white woman and another, if you take two white women off the street, their experiences and their perspectives and their views are not inherently going to be the same thing. Why should they be? Why would they be? Just like you can't just pick off two black people off a map and be like, okay, they're going to believe the same thing, because it's like, well, no, well, why would they? Like, it doesn't make sense. And why is that even the one thing that I find really curious with the identity politics pushers is, why have you even chosen these categories of identity? Like, why have you decided that it's race, gender, and sexuality, right? Why is it not height? Why is it not wealth? Okay, they do the wealth one sometimes. Why is it not language? Why is it not, it's like it could be so many different things. It could be hair color.
But I think they do it because their argument for it would be because of the historical importance of it. But to me, it's like, well, you're just continuing the historical importance of it. You're like continuing the issues that say people were divided up economically based on race.
Yeah.
Like that was basically slavery. So you're only continuing this awful history if you're trying to frame everything still within that perspective. And I also think that's, I used to think it's weird, and I still think it's weird, but now my mind is more used to hearing, like people refer to each other as black and white. Like now I've started to do it. It's, it's like, I never grew up like that.
Yeah.
And I definitely I think I still see people as individuals, but my mind has definitely shifted to just be using the language and the terminology to like describe the world. So I think that these
people. Do you think that's a shame?
I do think it's a shame. Yes. And I actually think it could possibly be reversed, but if I'm just around it all the time, then you sort of adopt it just by default. Something else I wanted to say was, you were talking about you feel as if you're the only person that thinks this way. And I think it's similar for me when I compare my in-person interactions versus being online. Because online you find your like-minded people, like with the click of a button, and that's very nice and encouraging. But it is different when you're walking around. You know that there are people out there who think like you, but you never know. It might be some person who will just call you a horrible, I don't know, some bad word. And so you have to kind of keep it to yourself. And I think that's really sad. And I think I do want to participate in making that a change in that way. Like sometimes I will speak to people and I almost want to tell them what I think actually, because then they'll realize that, that there are nice people out there who probably think things that you think are horrible if I were to tell them. But because people like me stay silent, nobody really knows. Like in person, I know I say stuff online.
Yeah.
And like occasionally I'll tell people like what I do online, but usually when I'm interacting, that doesn't come up. So.
Yeah. And what's been the feedback to your online videos, your YouTube channels? Because you've put out a lot of stuff out there. So what's been the general response?
I think most of it has been positive. There's definitely been some very vocal, vitriolic hate coming from people like that. That's definitely happened.
Can I ask who it mainly comes from?
Well, I feel bad saying it, but I would say Black Americans. I don't want to say that they're all like that, because I know they're not. But it mostly comes from them. I would say I haven't really had any what people would call white liberals comments on my channel. I would say the most negative stuff comes from Black Americans, from what I can tell. Like they'll say stuff like I should go back to my country, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or that I hate myself, or that I'm just doing this to attack people. And it's just that's so not the truth, like those things, but it doesn't matter. Like that's another thing. Like that's how they've grown up to view other Black people as being like in their tribe almost. And so like what they do is for their tribe and should be for the advancement of their race. And I'm just like, no. I'm here in order to become the best version of me, whatever that is. You can't like control other people just because they look like you. And I think that in itself is like almost a slavery mindset, in that you're trying to like control someone just because of some accident of their birth, because that's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, and I guess you can choose to embrace certain things if you want. If you want to go and embrace that part of your identity, that's fine. But you can't like force other people to do that. That's not right. It's immoral to do that.
Yeah.
No.
I mean, one thing I've certainly noticed is that with different people, you know, people, what's the best way to phrase it? The way people think about their own identity, I think firstly, they use their own personal view of it to kind of assume everyone else uses those same qualities. But firstly, the way people categorize themselves and identify is it's a very individual thing, and the way they rank different factors can be very different. So to me, obviously, yeah, I'm a black man. I know I'm like I'm cool with that. I'm happy with that. Like that's all good, right? I'm black. But in terms of how I think about my own personal identity and how I would sort of categorize myself as a human being, my race is really low on it. And this is different for everybody. And I'm not saying either way is right or wrong, right? For some people, you know, black is right at the top. It might not even be black, it might be African, it might be Nigeria, right? For different people, it's different. And but I think that when you get someone who thinks that their race, like it doesn't even matter what race they are. I think when you get someone who thinks that their race is sort of the top thing, they then see the entire sort of world through that viewpoint. So everything does become quite literally black and white and brown because they're assuming that all these white people also think that race is, you know, the sort of top thing. They also think all these other black people think race is the top thing. So the world becomes this sort of battleground almost in a way, or just like a very segregated thing. Whereas to me, there are other qualities that I have, things I believe in, parts of my personality trait that I think are far more important in the grand scheme of things than my skin color, you know. And I'm thinking more like my character, like what do I believe, what do I think, what am I interested in, what do I do, what do I have to offer the world, right? The fact I'm black is, like, as you said, that's circumstantial. I didn't do anything for that, good or bad. It's just like it just is, right? It just is like it. So I'm not gonna chastise somebody for this. Is why I find this whole thing a little bit disgusting. So when you're seeing people online or in the real world and they're chastising somebody for being a white male, and I'm just like, that is racist and sexist. That's just what that person is, right? They were just born a white male. So you're now attacking them, right? What I often do is I just swap the words. So I think, okay, replace the word white with any other ethnicity. And how does this sound, or how does it come across? Okay. If someone was attacking you for being a black woman, how is that going to come across, right? People are going to be like, whoa, like, no, you can't do that. You see what I mean? But then those same people will go and they'll sling mud at someone for, oh, you're a straight white male, that, you know, blah, blah, blah. And that's part of their argument. And you're just like, how do you reconcile these things? Like the hypocrisy I find it very maddening, because I'm just like, look, can we just stop? Like, just stop doing this thing.
Yeah, to me, that's just plain racism. And sometimes it's scary because you're just like, why isn't this just obvious to everybody?
Yeah.
Like, why do you have to be making arguments about it?
Yeah.
And like I said, the people are like, well, it's the historical because of what happened historically. But it's just racism, and nobody should be judged for the actions of other people. Okay, you could have different segments of the population, and that segment of the population is more likely to do something. Okay, but I think we should strive as much as we can to still judge people individually, even if we know those things. Like that is my like ideal world.
Absolutely. And most people agree with that, but they only see it from one direction. So they don't see the hypocrisy, right? If you had somebody who's on the if you take somebody who's on the far right of the political spectrum, who's some like ethno-nationalist or whatever, most people, 98% of people can be like, no, that's the wrong idea because XYZ. You shouldn't be judging people. You shouldn't be judging entire groups based on individuals or based on this or based on that. And most people are quick to say that. But it's like when it happens on the other end, it gets a pass, or it's even encouraged, or it's like, oh no, that's different because, and I'm like, no, it's not different. I don't care if it's coming from far left, far right, like it's the same thing. Like you're literally just doing the same thing. And yeah, I just find it maddening. So when I find people demonizing someone for You know, if you're demonizing someone for being straight, you're demonizing someone for being gay, you're demonizing someone for being white, being black, being Jewish. Like, it's the same thing to me. I don't have like a totem pole where it's okay in one direction and terrible in another. To me, it's just like, it's all terrible. Like, stop. That's like my very simple view. I'm just like, look, just stop. Like, I get history. I understand history, but we're now in the present. So how long are we going to keep bashing on about things that happened not in our lifetimes, not even sometimes in our parents' lifetimes, sometimes not even in your grandparents' lifetimes, and you don't even know who was involved in these things, and no one who is alive today was involved in these things. So we can acknowledge it, we can recognize it, and then you can just move on rather than just playing into the same thing that created those issues in the first place.
Yeah. There's two things I wanted to say. One was that, just as a side note, almost something else that annoys me is that, like, you end up having to talk so much about race just to try to get people to stop focusing so much on it. It's just like something that feeds on itself, and there's no way to really get around it. You know, so like I can get to start talking about things about, say, Black people because of my skin color, even though I'd rather, like, that's not the standard by which people can get to talk about those things, but because of how society is set up, it's almost like you can't escape it. That's how it feels to me sometimes. And then anything I do, I've mentioned this, I think, on one other interview. Like, when I make art with Black people, no, it's not Black empowerment art. It's just art. Like, it's not something to try and like advance like Black people forward. So it's kind of annoying, honest. Like, I just want to like live my life, but I'm forced to, almost like I have a calling that I don't really want, but I have to do it if I want to, like we were talking about earlier, have an impact on the way things are going that I think are dangerous. That was a side note, actually, but you look like you might want to say something.
No, go for it. No, carry on.
And then, there's something else I wanted to say. I wanted to say, the other thing that I wanted to mention was, you were saying it seemed as if people were getting over the race thing, but then it's like it was coming back. I really think that we as a society have to figure out how to deal with the statistics, because even if you're not seeing groups perform equally, so you're like, well, this is because of the past, like things still haven't shifted, that doesn't mean that you should still be taking racist actions to correct for those things. In my mind, whatever is happening that you don't like, say a certain population of percentage of like the prison population or something is a certain color, or people who are succeeding in certain areas are a certain ethnic background. For one, even if those things, okay, one thing is to acknowledge the possibility that these groups are behaving differently. So that's the first thing. And then the other thing is, even if you're still suspicious that there could be bias at play, because there could be individual bias at play, that still doesn't mean that you should just like implement basically reverse systematic racism.
Absolutely.
So that's something else.
So I think you're talking about things like gender-based, race-based affirmative action and discriminatory hiring policies and lots of these so-called diversity initiatives, which some of them, especially the ham-fisted ones, essentially just boil down to racial and sexual discrimination, essentially. I mean, I see this in the world of music, for example. So, for example, like I'm a professional rapper, and they've got some of these schemes where they're trying to force lineups in festivals or at events or whatever, for example, to be 50-50 gender split. Okay. I'm a rapper. I'm a hip hop artist. I don't know the actual stats, but I would estimate that about 95% of rappers are male. So if you're going to go to a hip hop event or a hip hop festival, why would you expect 50% of either the performers or the attendees to be female, right? It's not 50% people participating in this thing. So why would you suddenly affect that? And why would you, firstly, why is it a problem? This is the thing. Like, people make it out that every disparity is a problem. And I'm like, well, why is it a problem? Why does it matter if 70% of, if 80% of mechanical engineers are male and 20% are female? I don't care. If 90% of primary school teachers are female and 10% are male, I don't care, right? Let people do what they want to do. I don't think that every disparity is just a problem. And then further on, the only way that you could engineer that 50-50 is by, so in this music example, is by discriminating against men. And that's actually what has started to happen in certain places. So you'll have a festival and maybe 95% of the people applying to perform at this festival are men, but you're trying to make the outcome 50-50. And the only way you can do that is to discriminate against the men, right? There's literally no other way that you can achieve this 50-50 balance otherwise. And that means that you've broken the meritocracy, you're actually implementing a sexist policy. And again, people seem very, very blind to this, or very ignorant about what they're actually doing. And I'm here just kind of like, wait, no, what are you doing? You can't do that. Right? That's not fair. You're being the thing that you're claiming to fight against. And that's something I see a lot, people being the thing that they claim to fight against. And it's yeah, I feel like we spent the whole podcast like ranting about things that annoy us, but maybe it's good to get it off the chest sometimes.
Yeah, something else I want to say to add to that is that to add more to the ranting, is that I think it hinders the progress that they want also, which is something that super annoys me. Because say, for example, I'm really into, say there was a book or a series that I liked that had a female protagonist in it that I've always liked from when I was younger. But once these social justice people get their hands on it and start promoting it as that, I'm almost turned off. And that's what it is for a lot of the population, because the writer wasn't making it about a female person. I mean, sometimes the story is like that, but it wasn't made to fit into our current social debates. But then they'll turn it into that. And then it almost becomes about the person being whatever gender or whatever thing they're trying to promote, and not about some universal value that it was kind of nice to see in a non-typical character. Like it doesn't become about just a story anymore. It becomes about advancing the politics. And I think that it hinders the kind of progress that they want to see. Because at least for people like me, as a female, it's like, well, I don't want to get into something because then it's going to become all about that no matter what I do. No matter if I'm in it just for the love of the actual thing, it's going to become about that because of people like this. And I don't know if it really inspires younger women, maybe because they're kind of, maybe they're oblivious to the battle that's going on. But I think it hinders what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. And it just annoys people. Like, people are getting, I think I'm glad that people are getting annoyed with it and are becoming quite vocal, that they're getting annoyed with lots of this so-called social justice stuff, and just the forcing of certain narratives and forcing of, like, diversity is wonderful when it's like, diversity happens naturally. If you treat people fairly and you allow equal opportunities and you just let the chips fall, you use like meritocracy, whether this is at universities or jobs, or you're going to get diversity like that. It's going to happen because there's talent
Right.
everywhere. There's different perspectives everywhere, right? I'm not specifically having you on this podcast because I was there like, I need to find a black woman to talk to. You see what I mean? Like, imagine if I was doing my podcast like that and I was like, oh, okay, wait,
People
oh
do
no,
that though.
yeah, but
I like it.
this is the thing. It's like, oh no, I've spoken to 3 white males this month. I can't talk to another one. It's like, seriously, like, this is what people are doing. I'm just like, no, like, there are interesting people across the board. So if I'm just like, I want to talk to interesting people with interesting perspectives, you're going to get diversity. One week, I've done podcasts where it's been 4 women in a row, boom. And then I might do like 4 guys in, right? It doesn't matter. And I just feel like this is how it goes with everything. And that's, the way I was raised from a child all the way through my teenage years, being a young adult, that's just that's essentially how it was. Like people were just like, yeah, this, you know, just happens. And as a result, people weren't, all this stuff wasn't constantly on people's brains. I think that one of the saddest things I think in 2019 is that I think in the Western world, people have become more race conscious and more like gender conscious. Like some people may think that's a good thing. I don't think it's a good thing. I don't think it's good for me to walk down the street and be looking at people and be sort of categorizing them in my brain based on their skin color. Like I never did that. So I don't know. I don't think that's a good thing because, yeah, I don't know. I find it very frustrating. And then on the other hand, I think it also leads to the backlash, right? So you see a lot of people complaining about like the rise in you know, I don't know what
White
people want to say, like
nationalism,
white nationalism, or
white,
like, you know, the
I'll
alt
just say
right,
white
or in the
nationalism. Yeah.
UK, sorry, in Europe, you've got the rise of some of these like, you know, pretty, I don't want to say like far right, but pretty right wing nationalistic parties and stuff like that. And I'm like, it's not a surprise. This is just an equal and opposite reaction. You're here talking about how horrible, how terrible the Western world is and terrible Western civilization is, and white people are terrible and men are terrible. Right? Why wouldn't you get a whole bunch of white guys who are going to be like, oh, okay, then, well, we're going to create our own thing here and we're going to fight against you now. And it's just like, the whole thing is just, yeah, it does do my head in.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That was something that actually happened to me where I never used to see people like that, but now I will like notice those things. Like I actually didn't care about that when I first came to the US. And that's hard for people to believe because everybody in America is like that. Like their brains are literally wired like that because of the programming that they've had. Um, you're taught to self-identify and to identify other people like that from a very young age, from what I see here. And that's not something I was used to. So I also agree that that's not a good thing. And I think that it is more plastic or like changeable than people realize it is. It's not a given that you have to do that. And I think it does have to do with the culture. And then I also agree with what you were just saying as well.
Yeah. So how do we fix it, Desi-Rae? What do we do?
Well, like we were just saying, even though it's really tiring and it's almost like you have to get into it and start just talking about race all the time. Like that's really the only way. You have to jump into the conversation and keep trudging along, even though you feel like what you're saying is super obvious. And maybe you're repeating yourself a lot every time the same debate recycles itself in a different context. I think that has to be the only way to just keep maintaining the voice so that, as you put it, the crazies don't just make it illegal eventually to even have an opposing opinion. It's really bizarre to me. I don't know. I'm just like, well, I like to think, so I guess that makes me not the average person, which is really scary to think about. But I want to hear what somebody else is thinking, even if I don't agree. And like, yes, sometimes my emotions will be strongly attached to something too, but I think it's important to think. Like that is how civilization advances itself. It's really important to think and to hold different opinions in your head. That's like how creativity occurs, and like almost nothing we have in this world that has benefited us could have come about if we like silenced our thinkers. So it seems obvious, but it's like mob rule.
And what is next for you, Desi-Rae?
What is next for me? I think I'm gonna just focus on making more videos again, and hopefully starting my art, starting to paint some more, and also focus on crypto related things. I'm hoping that, the bull run has begun.
Oh
Even if
gosh.
it takes a couple of years to really pan out. Yeah, I'm gonna focus on those things because I think that that aligns with sort of my passion, but also where it's helpful for the world. So
Absolutely. Awesome, Desi-Rae. We're just coming up to I think we're just coming up to an hour right now. So let people know where they can find you online.
sure. to hear about my thoughts on these kinds of topics, you can go to justthinkingoutloud.tv. You can also type in Desi-Rae Thinking in YouTube. And you can also find a podcast version of that, any podcast aggregator you can find me on. You can also find me at cryptoramble.com. That's cryptoramble, one word.com. And you can also find me at Desi-Rae.com, DESI-RAE.com. And I'm sure you will find very useful and insightful things at these places.
Awesome. Desi-Rae, thank you so much for joining the Real Talk with Zuby podcast. I'm sure we will talk again soon.
Hopefully. Thank you also for having me.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.